What's good? It's Woog. Did y'all see this coming? Because I didn't see this coming. Look, it's been reported that the first PBC fight card with Amazon Prime is going to be a pay-per-view event with Tszyu versus Keith Thurman, or Keith Thurman versus Tszyu. I'm seeing like half and half in terms of who's being listed as the A side, but I think I saw Premier Boxing Champions, PBC itself, list Keith Thurman as the A side, even though it would be for Tszyu's 154-pound title. Keith Thurman has never fought at 154. So that's going to be the main event of this Amazon Prime pay-per-view, courtesy of PBC. And then the co-main event is Rolando Raleigh Romero versus Isaac Cruz for Romero's WBA super lightweight or 140-pound title, which, I mean, there's a lot to unpack with this fight card. I mean, what the hell happened with Ryan Garcia versus Raleigh Romero? I mean, how humiliating. That just tells you the level of disconnect and discord over there at Golden Boy between the promotion's leadership and Ryan Garcia, their star fighter. Like, if Ryan Garcia really felt like him versus Raleigh Romero was nearly complete, nearly done, to where Ryan Garcia is announcing it on social media, he's got like a graphic and everything, who's he hearing this from? Well, yeah, the co-main's gonna be Raleigh Romero versus Isaac Cruz. And then, I mean, it's a pretty fun fight card. You've also got Sebastian Fundora versus Serhii Bohachuk. Now, Bohachuk was a rising prospect before he was unexpectedly knocked out by Brandon Adams in 2021. He has since returned to the ring. He's fought like 5 times, won them all by knockout, so he's back on the winning track. And Sebastian Fundora, he was taking the 154-pound division by storm, including a stoppage over Erickson Lubin, and then he beat Carlos Ocampo, and then was unexpectedly knocked out by Brian Mendoza, which just changed everything at the 154-pound division. That was one of the upsets of the year. That was one of the knockouts of the year. And Fundora hasn't yet returned to the ring since. That was in April of 2023. So this upcoming fight against Bohachuk is going to be Fundora's return to the ring. But let's talk a moment about this main event between Tszyu and Keith Thurman. Like I said, there's a lot to unpack with this fight card. What is up with Jermell Charlo? I saw that Fundora versus Bohachuk is going to be for the WBC. And this is just reportedly, the WBC 154-pound title will be up for grabs in that one. And that is one of the 2 remaining belts that Jermell Charlo still has. Now remember, Jermell Charlo went up and lost to Canelo way up at 168. He was still the undisputed champion at 154, but then he was stripped one by one. First, the WBO title was stripped, and Tszyu has since earned that, and then defended it successfully against Brian Mendoza, the same Mendoza who knocked out Fundora. Tszyu beat him via decision. Competitive fight, fun fight. So the WBO was first stripped from Jermell Charlo. Then the IBF belt is going to be up for grabs in a vacant title bout between Murtazaliev and Kolke. So that's 2 of Jermell Charlo's belts. And now it looks like the WBC belt is going to be up for grabs between Fundora and Bohachuk, and they're making Jermell Charlo the champion in recess. So it looks like there are no plans of Jermell Charlo as it stands to return to the ring just yet. And I really question whether he's even going to come back to 154 after this. I mean, not only did he gain weight to fight Canelo, but now there's inactivity, relatively speaking. But Jermell Charlo hasn't fought at 154 now since the summer of 2022, when he became undisputed against Brian Castano. Brian Castano, by the way, in that rematch against Castano, and Castano hasn't returned to the ring since that fight. So Castano's been out of the ring for like a year and a half now. But I have real doubts on whether Jermell Charlo is going to come back to 154. I'm thinking, okay, so then what would be next for him? Is he going to go up and campaign at 160, try to earn a belt or 2 there, and thereby becoming, potentially a 2-division champion? Maybe he fights Carlos Adames, who's been knocking at the door trying to fight Jermall Charlo, who still holds the WBC middleweight title. So maybe Jermall Charlo goes up from 160 to 168. We just saw him fight Jose Benavidez Jr. at a catch weight. So maybe Jermall goes up to 168, Jermell goes up to 160 and competes for the WBC belt. I don't know. I'm just kind of game theory playing this out in my head. But it's a little bit of a disappointment because I think I speak for a lot of fight fans when I say I really wanted to see how Jermell Charlo versus Tszyu would play out. But yeah, again, it looks like we're getting Tszyu versus Keith Thurman, which, I mean, damn, why? Look, Keith Thurman, with all of his inactivity, he struck me as somebody in this era, at least in recent months and years, as somebody who's looking for a big payday. I thought that Keith Thurman was going to target a big name that would be less risk, maybe a rematch with Danny Garcia, or a fight against, I don't know, Errol Spence or Terrence Crawford, you know, a bigger name. I did not expect Keith Thurman to fight Boots Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, maybe Conor Benn, maybe somebody like that, Conor Benn, you know, and do that fight out in the UK. I thought that that would be the type of thing that Keith Thurman at this stage of his career would be angling for. You know, at 35 years old with, again, multi-year stretches of inactivity. And we're going to go over that. But then I started seeing Keith Thurman against Stanionis, but that was right before PBC and Showtime was no longer. So now we know PBC's got the deal with Amazon Prime. And by the way, this is a good fight card. It doesn't merit a damn pay-per-view. And I wonder if this is a pay-per-view, what kind of fights are we going to be getting on regular Amazon Prime? It's going to be interesting to see how the schedule plays out for PBC on Amazon Prime and how many of those will be regular Amazon Prime and how many of those will be pay-per-view. But for a minute, it looked like we were going to get Keith Thurman against Stanionis, which I was thinking like, damn, Keith, okay, you want that type of smoke, that young smoke at 147 still? But now it turns out Keith Thurman's going up in weight to challenge Tszyu for his WBO 154-pound title. So another question, what are they then going to do with Stanionis, who was trying to get, you know, was scheduled to fight Virgil Ortiz Jr. 3 different times to defend his, Stanionis's, share of the lesser or regular WBA title? It's just been a frustrating stretch for Stanionis, who hasn't fought since he earned the WBA regular title against Radza Butayev. So it's been a long time since Stanionis has been in the ring. If you want to know how old that fight was, that was on the Errol Spence versus Yordanis Ugas undercard. So this is very interesting. Why would Keith Thurman want to fight Tszyu at 154 with all of the inactivity? Tszyu has been on an absolute tear. I mean, he stopped Tony Harrison, he knocked out Carlos Ocampo in the first round, and now he's beaten Brian Mendoza. So Tszyu is a problem at 154. Again, Keith Thurman's never fought at 154. Now, when Keith Thurman was at his best with those, you know, okay, because he started off being a knockout artist. Then he started going up in competition and fighting guys like Diego Chavez. And Diego Chavez was a really good fighter. In fact, I think Diego Chavez might have been the A side of that Chavez versus Thurman bout. But Thurman stopped Diego Chavez. Then he stopped like Jesus Soto Caras, beat Julio Diaz, beat Robert the Ghost Guerrero, Luis Collazo, right? And then he's got those back-to-back fights against Sean Porter and against Danny Garcia. So Keith Thurman, again, went from being a knockout artist to somebody who was rounding out his game and really becoming a sharp, technically sound boxer, just improving leaps and bounds. And then I would say he peaked around that Porter, Danny Garcia time, and then he was out of the ring for almost 2 years when he was at his absolute best with the WBC and WBA welterweight titles. And that was largely due to injury. So when he returned to the ring, he fought Josecito Lopez, who had Thurman badly hurt in the middle rounds, and Thurman ended up winning a majority decision win. Then he fought Manny Pacquiao a few months later. Huge payday. Keith Thurman fought super competitively, got dropped early, ended up rallying back to a split decision loss against Manny Pacquiao. Very competitive and close fight. And then he was out of the ring for like almost 3 years, Keith Thurman was. And then he returned to the ring to fight Mario Barrios, who got stopped by Gervonta Davis. Keith Thurman fights Barrios at 147. Barrios was a 140 guy, a big 140 guy, but a 140 guy mostly. And then Keith Thurman beat Barrios via 12-round decision. He looked good, but he didn't look great. We haven't gotten the prime version of Keith Thurman since the Danny Garcia and Sean Porter fights. But that fight against Mario Barrios was in February of 2022. So now it's been another 2 years of inactivity for Keith Thurman. And you could argue why he's been out of the ring. You know, he came close to getting this fight done. He was looking for a deal for this fight. And, you know, he wanted this opponent, that opponent, turned down this opponent. Whatever the case, inactivity is inactivity. So now you're going to come back. And I don't know what they're paying Keith Thurman here. I don't know what his purse is. I'd imagine it's a pretty handsome sum of money for him to be fighting Tszyu. So, I mean, look, I'm going to do a proper preview on this fight and on Romero versus Isaac Cruz as we near the fight date. But just, you know, doing a quick, you know, gut instinct assessment here, I do not like Keith Thurman's chances, not only to win the fight, but I don't like his chances on being able to go the full distance. Like, if you look at Tszyu's style, it's almost like somewhat Canelo-like, where he's a bit of a patient hunter. And Keith Thurman hasn't stopped an opponent since Luis Collazo back in 2015. I repeat, Keith Thurman does not have a stoppage win since 2015, more than 8 years ago. And again, this is all at 147. Tszyu is shown to have a good chin, and he's a pretty hellacious puncher. He's pretty economical, but he can let his hands go as well when he wants to up the volume a bit. And I've seen Keith Thurman hurt to the body against Manny Pacquiao. I've seen him hurt to the body against Mario Barrios, against Luis Collazo. I've seen him hurt to the body a lot. Tszyu can absolutely wreck you to the body. And so if Keith Thurman is no longer one time, and he got that name because he was a knockout artist again earlier in his career, if he's no longer a knockout artist, and if his sharpness has declined over the years, again, he had a 2-year spell of activity between Garcia and Josecito Lopez, a nearly 3-year stretch of inactivity between Pacquiao and Mario Barrios, and now again, a 2-year period of inactivity between Barrios and Tszyu. So I do not expect Keith Thurman to be nearly as sharp as he was. So what, is he gonna outwork the 29-year-old Tszyu? Like, I don't think, tit for tat outbox Tszyu without getting trapped on the ropes, getting hit against the corner, or starting to fatigue in the middle and late rounds, being the 35-year-old inactive fighter against a very active Tszyu. I don't like any of this for Keith Thurman. So again, they must be paying him a lot. Is this, I mean, maybe he sees something in Tszyu that he finds exploitable. Maybe that's the case. Otherwise, this can't be anything but a cash out fight. And I mean, this will be a pretty visible affair, I'm assuming, but I don't know, an Amazon Prime pay-per-view on March 30th, I believe. I don't know how many people will buy this pay-per-view. I'd imagine a ton of people are going to stream the fight. That's just the environment that boxing finds itself in, as well as the UFC. But I just wonder how many paid pay-per-view viewers they're going to be, to where whatever they pay Keith Thurman, if it is as much as I think he might be getting paid, to make this worth it, to make that make sense. I just don't know. But look, it's not like Keith Thurman was like a pay-per-view star in the past. Yes, Manny Pacquiao versus Keith Thurman was pay-per-view, but that's because Manny Pacquiao has been a pay-per-view fighter for like a decade plus, right? Keith Thurman, even when he was fighting Sean Porter and Danny Garcia, that's when PBC was trying to, more so democratize boxing and have it free and available to the wider audience on Fox. And before that on like CBS, they were really bringing it to mainstream TV. So even then, people weren't paying to see Keith Thurman fights. It just so happened we were fortunate enough and privileged enough to get a Keith Thurman versus Danny Garcia type of fight on regular TV. But much has changed in the boxing landscape and with PBC since that. So Keith Thurman hasn't been a bona fide pay-per-view star. I mean, I don't care if him versus Mario Barrios was on pay-per-view. It doesn't mean that it was a highly bought or that it merited a pay-per-view billing. I mean, and when he fought Josecito Lopez, that was on Fox. So look, in terms of quality of career, Keith Thurman had a great run. He had a really, really good run. I just wish, as a fight fan and a fan of Keith Thurman, quite frankly, I like him in interviews, very interesting guy. I just wish that beyond that 2016, 2017, where he fought and beat Sean Porter and Danny Garcia, and he was an undefeated, unified champion at welterweight. I just wish that that was extended longer. But again, I don't think that we've gotten prime Keith Thurman since he fought Danny Garcia in 2017. So no, he wasn't a pay-per-view star. So Tszyu versus Keith Thurman pay-per-view, it's an interesting, intriguing fight, which again, I'd be curious to see what the betting odds are, but they can't be good for Keith Thurman, I'd imagine. If they are good for Keith Thurman, I know where I think I'm putting my money. And again, that's not to slight Keith Thurman, especially when he was at his prime, but let's be real. We're dealing with a 35-year-old who's had way too much inactivity for me to envision him being super competitive and having a real shot at beating a prime Tszyu right now. Like, those are just my earliest thoughts. But again, I'm going to do further analysis as we get closer to the fight date. And then, Rolly Romero versus Isaac Cruz. Why would Rolly Romero pick fighting Isaac Cruz over fighting Ryan Garcia? Unless, Al Heyman or whoever's advising Rolly Romero got hit in his ear about the disarray or something. Or maybe they offered him like some multi-fight thing where win or lose against Isaac Cruz, he's guaranteed future big fight, big money opportunities. Whereas maybe they said to him, hey, if you go over there and fight Ryan Garcia, there's nothing guaranteed. Say you lose that fight, get knocked out against Ryan Garcia, what is there for you afterwards? Well, first of all, I actually think that Rolly Romero would probably have a better chance against Ryan Garcia than he will against Isaac Cruz. I look at this as being a terrible matchup for Rolly Romero. Isaac Cruz is going to keep on bringing the heat, keep on bringing the pressure. Rolly Romero is a pretty good athlete, hard puncher. Let's get that straight. He's a hard puncher, pretty good athlete, not a very good technical boxer. I just don't know how he's going to withstand the constant pressure that I expect Isaac Cruz to apply. Whereas again, if Rolly Romero would have instead selected to fight Ryan Garcia, then you've got a fight against Ryan Garcia, one of the biggest pay-per-view stars in today's boxing. Even though, look, Ryan Garcia, I saw him fight Tank Davis on pay-per-view, but Tank Davis drove that. Tank Davis was the A side there. I haven't seen Ryan Garcia sell a ton of pay-per-view as the A side fighter, right? So it's a little bit obscure. I don't know how Ryan Garcia would do as an A side of a pay-per-view. But again, you would think that Rolly Romero would choose fighting Ryan Garcia, just opportunity-wise. Defend your title against Ryan Garcia rather than defending it against Isaac Cruz. And where does this leave Ishmael Barroso, who is the mandatory interim title holder, who's supposed to be getting the next crack at Rolly Romero? Is it going to be Ryan Garcia versus Ishmael Barroso? And will a title be on the line? I don't know what has been worked out behind the scenes there, but again, I said that there was a lot to unpack, but those are some of my initial questions. I don't love Rolly Romero's chances against Isaac Cruz. Even if Isaac Cruz, ever since getting stopped by Gervonta Davis, he looked great against old man Yoriorkis Gamboa, who shouldn't have even been in that fight, really. It was kind of sad to see that. But then even against Eduardo Ramirez, who was coming up a couple of divisions, I believe, to fight Isaac Cruz. Isaac Cruz looked devastating in those two fights, but in his last fight against Giovanni Cabrera, looked way less impressive and looked very one-dimensional, very predictable, and very beatable, quite frankly. And that was a split decision win for Isaac Cruz against a pretty unknown Giovanni Cabrera. But I still think that, at least with my earliest thoughts, I think that Isaac Cruz is a really bad matchup for Rolly Romero. But yeah, let me know your initial thoughts on this Tszyu versus Keith Thurman and Rolly Romero versus Isaac Cruz PBC Amazon Prime pay-per-view event. Let me know your thoughts on this stuff in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.